Welcome back to another episode of the Bites and Bites podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Neveranville. Today we're talking about cybersecurity, food systems, defense-inspired thinking, and breakfast burritos. I am joined by Brian Schleifer, or as he goes by, Schleif, a seasoned cybersecurity professional with a background in defense and systems security engineering. In this episode, we will talk about the intersection of military cyber strategy or defense strategy and what it means for protecting our food and agriculture systems. It's a smart, grounded conversation that connects real-world risks to the systems that feed us every day. Thanks for tuning in, and let's jump into it. Well, now that we've basically just spent 45 minutes chatting without recording, I decided I should probably hit the record button. Brian, thanks for being here. So we're going to jump straight into it. Favorite food and favorite food memory. They do not need to be the same thing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I think my favorite food all time, everywhere I go, I'll try it out. Breakfast burrito.
Really?
Breakfast burritos, huge deal. But one of the paramount things that has to be part of this breakfast burrito is a homemade flour tortilla. You have to have that on. And that ties into two different memories. One, so growing up in Texas, small town Texas, they actually used to create and make breakfast burritos at gas stations. And that is some of the best breakfast burritos you will ever have in your entire life. One of the other instances, because I was thinking about this as a food memory, San Antonio, Texas, about an hour and a half from where I grew up, used to go with my grandparents, a place called Ponchos. And a couple of people have heard of it. I think it's closed down or closing down at some point. But the coolest part was at tables, they had these little flags. So rather than like having a flag down, literally flag down a waitress or waiter, you would have these little flags and you would just basically send the flag up the pole and they'd come back. And they used to have commercials and they'd be like, sopapillas. And if anybody knows what sopapillas are, they're sort of like a beignet, but not. They're the Mexican food version of that. And you would bite off the corner and squirt honey in it and eat it that way. And I remember going, and I was a not skinny child, so I used to love to eat, and they would have a buffet, and that was the biggest thing. Ponchos was this huge Mexican buffet, and I'm sure it was just as good as like going to a lunchroom in any elementary school out there, but they had cheese enchiladas, and it was the like corn with the like canned nacho cheese, if you know what I'm talking about, that they heat up at like any kind of sports event and pour over. But I remember going and eating like 10 of those bad boys, and I was like, it was a huge accomplishment as a child of 10 or whatever it was at the time and eating those. So breakfast burrito, favorite food all time, and memory was Ponchos in San Antonio, Texas.
I do like Mexican food, and I have had the privilege of having it in Mexico, not just on holiday. I was in Mexico City, and it changed my life. Like, it's an incredibly, we have overprocessed it in the US, but it is an amazing when you have an authentic
It's a game changer. It's a game changer.
Yeah, it really is. Watching, I was at a food market because I did a street tour, food street tour. And I remember watching grandma making the tortillas, and then it was just a little cheese, and then it was a squash blossom was in the quesadilla. And I thought, this is weird, but where else am I going to have this? Right?
Yeah.
It was amazing. It changed my life. It was amazing. I haven't had anything since that even comes close to it in terms of that type of food. And it was so good. So I completely understand the nostalgia around homemade.
It's super interesting because doing some research and articles just for some other courses I've done and watching a bunch, like Netflix pumps out all these food things and it's documentaries. And it was like, hey, we like literally the population of the earth couldn't handle organic food because we can't make enough at this time. And that was sort of some of the initiation or how some processed food came into fruition. And I read, what is it called? Salt, Sugar, Fat. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book. And they talked about how like margarine or whatever, the government was going to try to make all fake butter be painted pink or something and labels like imitation. It was a very interesting book. It was very eye-opening about the big conglomerates coming in and saying, hey, we have to have these parts, right? And they still do this with the mouthfeel and doing testing of all of that, right? So how does it feel in your mouth? And then that balance with the salt and sugar and fat, of course, right? And anything else. If you go look, I had to write it was like third grade, I had to write a paper or something. And we looked at the differences between like normal cheese and like fat-free cheese. And if you go look at, to this day, go look at labels, anything that takes away something adds somewhere else. So if you go look and it's higher in fat because it's real cheese, and you go look at low sodium, for instance, cheese or whatever, it'll be higher in like sugar or something else to try to achieve that same taste balance. And it's the same for bread and everything else. So I thought that was quite interesting of going back to the processed food perspective.
I learned something recently in the last couple of months about how the food industry has learned to market so well to us that different sensory, which you just mentioned, is a really big factor into marketing. But sonic marketing, so like hearing, like snap, crackle, pop, you know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as I say that, right? So Rice Krispie treats or Rice Krispies in general. And the fact that that's a big importance, like the crunch or how we like interact with it. But the problem with processed food, and I'm not picking on anybody at all for this, was saying, and I think people know this, is a lot of it's soft. And if we went to actually back to organic or like eating in more of that level, everything would be crunchy and our teeth and our jaws would be really hurting because of it. So you'd have to like ease your way into it because everything we eat is soft for the most part.
Or the blender market would do really well.
Yeah. I mean, let's be real.
Blended tacos, no thank you.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing. Netflix documentary. I'm just going to have a shameless plug here for my friend, Dr. Darren Detweiler. He was on the documentary Poisoned, and I highly recommend watching that one if you get a chance. It's talking about the food system and where it's at with food safety and things like that. And it was very eye-opening, especially as an OT and ICS person, because they actually showed you some of the behind the scenes, and like your heart starts to like palpitate a little bit when you see like them showing like the systems that are working in it. And you're like, no, don't show those things because then people know and that. Right. But it's quite interesting besides the context of the actual documentary, which is an award-winning documentary. It won an Emmy, actually. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that, Brian. But let's introduce you. So everybody meet Brian. Brian, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Brian Schleifer. I go by Schleif. I have worked in the defense industry. Ooh, goodness gracious, coming up on almost 25 years now. We're almost getting there. 24, creeping into 25 years. Went into the Air Force. Well, okay, so I'll just go back just a teeny bit, so grew up in a small town, Texas. Parents owned a bowling center. This is important because of food and growing up around food. Bowling center, which people may or may not realize, like some people used to be like, man, bowling centers have the best food. My parents did bang up job making food in the bowling center. Onion rings, man, phenomenal. We used to get these giant onions delivered, and they would make these big rings, and we do the whole like flour, milk fry. Just absolutely amazing. How I lived through all that grease, I don't know at the time, but grew up there. Then there was a tipping point, and myself and my mother both pointed, hey, you need to do something. College was not quite there yet, so let's go into the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force and went in. First base was in Virginia, and then I was very fortunate. I got to go to Germany right after that. And I lived in Germany 3.5 years, played rugby for a local team there. Why is that important to the food industry? I had some amazing Jaeger schnitzel. I learned German food at the German, like the Christmas markets are absolutely phenomenal, amazing. I learned that not everybody has like refrigerators because a lot of their stuff is different. Like their eggs, they don't put in refrigerators necessarily. They have like farmers market, and it's more of just a normal thing and how they've grown up there. But some of the best food, I lived right next to this building as I drove back from the base to my house. And it had, it was separated into 3 sections. It had a bread maker, a meat market, and alcohol. So you could literally go get everything you needed within these 3 stores back to back to back. It was awesome. So from there, from Germany, I went to England, and I got to live in England for 3 years. Completely different food profile, by the way. Love you, England, but sometimes the brunches, I was like, there's no flavor. But I do love blood pudding, Yorkshire, you know, what is it? Yorkshire pudding as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, which is a popover in the US if you need a comparison.
Yeah. Well, so I loved all that stuff. It was great. So did England, and of course through these times traveled around the world for deployments and so on. And then I landed back after England to Nevada and the States, lived up in Vegas for, I think it was like 3-ish years or so, 3-4 years. And then ended up in Florida, retired out of Florida, and then went to a company right after that. So as a DoD defense contractor, been part of that for, like I said, coming up almost on 6 years now in June, working in the cybersecurity arena. So during that Air Force career, traveling around, experiencing all that cool food, I was very fortunate and got to dabble anywhere from like putting Cat5 cables and, you know, the dirt in Iraq to helping design buildings to, I mean, you name it, right? Desktops, servers, all the way into cyber physical systems, which were working for UAVs and things like that. After the retirement, more so into like the munitions, and then even doing some cyber testing, facilitating that, not hands-on keyboards, to just clarify, doing that for, again, munitions and aircraft and so on. And so been doing that for a while now. I will say, this is the time I'll go ahead and say this, that I am speaking for myself, not the Department of Defense, nor the company I currently work for, or the government customers I support, speaking from my own opinion and for myself. But that's a little bit of my background. And then just to add on to that, sort of how we got into conversations and where we met, and the Industrial Control System Cybersecurity Conference in Atlanta was I am currently working on my doctorate through Purdue University. And in doing so, looking at embedded system cybersecurity, what I started to notice was that there's a lot of similarities from the weapon system and the defense industry side to all these other industries, whether that's medical, agricultural, robotics, maritime, you name it, railway. All of these things are very similar. Some have progressed because money has been invested in those instances. Some threats are different in certain industries. And so you'll see that. But I was noticing, I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, we have all these, our particular company and other people have these skill sets that can transverse. And so that's why we're here, to be honest with you, is just trying to help everyone out and recognize and realize the things that we can do to better not only help secure our systems, but make it safe overall, because safety and security are blended, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yes, of course. Thank you for that. It was awesome. And I even learned a little bit. So thank you. Brian and I spent actually quite a bit of time chatting. And it was actually quite funny how we originally met at the conference. If I remember correctly, it was a lot of alcohol, not me. I was actually quite sober. and I think you were too, actually. It was just everybody else around us. But I remember sitting, it was the military table, if you will. And I am not a military person. I am engaged to a ex-military man, but it is quite funny to me. I remember sitting down and I was immediately accepted. There was no questions. And it was just, you're part of the crew. Welcome. Here you go. Let's talk. And it was, I don't think I've belly laughed like that in a long time. So I definitely appreciated, the encouragement and to sit and to chat at the end of the evening when everybody was trying to wrap up or move on to their next event.
Yeah. Well, in the military, we're all about burning calories. So, laughter, what is it, 5 calories? We have to test your diaphragm out, right? That's the whole end. True. Like, as long as your diaphragm is working and we have that nice, loud laugh or things like you're trying to hold it in and they're shooting from different orifices of your body, then you're in.
Well, I used to sing opera, so my diaphragm's pretty good. But yeah, it was a great time. And it was nice to have a different perspective at ICS. I think a lot of times we kind of get caught up in our own stuff, to be honest. And I think having diversity of thought, whether that's you come from a different walk of life, you're a different type of person, or you're just coming from a different angle, is really super important. And so I appreciated the challenges that you were mentioning and establishing while we were talking, especially since you've taken on the crazy task of getting a PhD, full stop, regardless of what the subject matter is. And the fact that you're doing it in embedded systems and you have a systems thinking approach about it, and you realize that things are interconnected. I mean, that we need more people to connect the dots, especially in both private and public sectors. And so thank you. Thank you for doing that work. I think it's great. Just jumping in for a quick break and to say a big thank you. Firstly, we've made it to 30 episodes of the show. Wow. That's 30 episodes of conversations about agriculture and food, technology, and the people working hard behind the scenes to keep us safe. Thank you all for being part of this journey. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and share the podcast. It really does help spread the word and the mission. On a more personal note, I want to take a moment to say thank you to all who reached out recently after the passing of my cat, Kai. She was 20 and a half years old, which is 103 in human years. Obviously, she was a huge part of my life and this show, since she's been present through all 30 episodes behind the scenes recording and editing. Your messages, text, emails, pet stories, and photos that have been sent along the way the last week or so have meant more to me than I could put into words. Grief is a complex creature, but community makes it more bearable. So thank you, truly. This community is incredible, and I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you so much. All right, back to the episode. So now that we've definitely gone through your background in defense and advanced systems, in general security, how familiar are you with the agricultural and the food sector and critical infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So part of the studying was looking at that, right? For some of the courses. And that's when it was really eye-opening. And even looking at now, like industrial technology 4.0. And the irony is, just before I go a little bit backwards, but the irony is I have 2 courses that have started today. And one of them is strategic management and information technology, I believe. And funny enough, it's honed in on industry technology 4.0. So I get to dive in even more. And so again, everything, like you said, weaves together. So to be honest with you, right, am I like completely 100% immersed in agricultural cybersecurity? No. Have I read a ton of articles? And like we talked about a little bit before the recording, and learned more about the digitization of not only, the data, but also the autonomy of certain agricultural things like tractors and so on, irrigation, all of those was very eye-opening to me. Drones, looking at the soil and doing soil recovery. So learning and just being like, holy cow, like we're everywhere, right? Like as far as technology goes, it's everywhere to help speed up things, make it more efficient, and bring profitability to, farmers and so on. And so that's my level, if you will. And then also, like I said, realizing, oh, wow, some of those things that they are implementing are utilizing very similar hardware, software, firmware that I have witnessed or been studying for my degree.
I like that you've already made the connections, especially with understanding you have to protect it. Like you made that connection in your mind. You didn't have to be walked there. You already did it on your own. I find a lot of times I'm spending a lot of energy and awareness, which isn't a bad thing. Like talking to people about things, that's fine, because we're so far removed from our food system. And we've made it the most complex system on the planet that people just don't want to go near it, because it's like trying to find that needle in a haystack, literally, or it's a ball of string they don't want to have to unravel. And the cat is still messing with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's definitely difficult.
I used to travel to Tucson, Arizona a lot, and there's a lot of people from Caterpillar there, a lot. It's one of their proving grounds. And man, it was eye-opening just hearing some of their conversations they're taking, and they're global, right? They're all over the place, and how much they're looking at cybersecurity. In fact, there was a gentleman I met at the conference there from Caterpillar. Here's the cool part. Hashtag shout out Caterpillar if you have the CISO job available. But so here's what I like about that. There is cybersecurity in every aspect of that company. They have enterprise, right? IT. They have the manufacturing side, and they have the product side. They have literally every component, if you will, respectively, from a discipline and focus in that company. So, and I thought that was fascinating to me, because depending on who you talk to, and even the agricultural side, right, they may have 2 or 3 of those bits, right? If you look at like a John Deere or something like that. But because they'll tie in, maybe they do it all, and they're trying to incorporate like what we talked about, you're going to correct me, smart farming? No, precision farming. Precision farming.
It. Yay!
Yes, precision farming. But they're trying to tie that into their equipment so they can provide it to the farmers, because they know it's beneficial to them. But I will tell you, after reading it, and this is the part going back to like what I know or whatever in the tie-in was, I didn't really consider the data, the protection of the data, proprietary data, what is going to help increase and help the farmers out. I didn't really put that together. And I was like, whoa, they actually have that entity or focus that they're looking at that's important to them as well.
There's a lot of data in precision farming, because all the decisions are made with the data from precision farming. Part of the reason why Caterpillar, fun fact, part of the reason why Caterpillar has become such a powerhouse in cybersecurity is because they had a potential vulnerability in their software back in 2021. And they did notify DHS about it, and they worked through it. And they were contacted. So they take it very seriously, which is great, because that's what we need. Proactiveness, not like reactiveness, if you will. Right. Granted, it was reacting to a vulnerability. However, it was being proactive by letting people know it was happening. So I'm not surprised to hear that at all, Brian. Like they definitely were going through it, when that situation happened, rather. I think the data for me as well was a very big eye opener years back when I was working for a bakery company, and realizing that we actually had a lot of secret data, a lot of proprietary data. data and nobody was talking about it or thinking about it. And this was like pre-cloud. So everything was still kind of on-prem, but it was sort of starting to migrate to cloud. And the food industry is really interesting because they've done a good job of migrating some things to cloud, but other things not yet. It's interesting. It's an evolving process that's happening. But in terms of farmers and equipment that's autonomous, you have to think about how are they getting their updates? Who comes out to fix their equipment? Do they have right to repair? And this is obviously a debate that's now put to bed, thankfully. They do have right to repair, especially with John Deere. But how do we deal with that updating? And so I don't know if you heard about this, Brian, probably because you live in Florida and it didn't affect you. But in the Midwest, the Northern Midwest and Canada, they had a solar flare incident, which isn't a cybersecurity incident, but it knocked out the GPS on their tractors. And in order to do precision farming, they need GPS to have the coordinates that is pre-programmed by, obviously data and all these things to be able to plant properly. And when that was knocked out, granted, it was like, an act of God. A solar flare is not, we can't really do anything about that. It caused a lot of havoc. And people who had only learned how to farm in that precision technology era were like, I can't do this. I cannot harvest. I can't do this stuff. And it's like the old boys and girls had to come out of like retirement, teach them how to actually harvest properly via analog. So it still got done. It just wasn't done as efficiently, I guess is the word I will say. And it's interesting because it's like a lesson in, hacking. Why would that stop a hacker? They just now know how disruptive that is. Whether it's disruptive or financial, either way, that's the two things we're most worried about in the food industry in general.
Well, Kristen, to me, so one of the things I think about often, right, is there's always the financial aspect, right? Yep. But holistically speaking, I think of it from I'm going to say safety and strategic standpoint. Mm-hmm. If I were, like a kid playing Risk or something, right? Back in the day, the board game Risk. But if I were to try to do something malicious and have that intent and that mindset, what would I do? And one of the things I like to talk about, because they do it in military exercises, is you take away resources, right? You have psych warfare and resources. And those are two big deals. How do people operate on a day-to-day basis? They need their resources. They need water and they need food. Yeah. So what can you do? You can look at taking down irrigation and, farming equipment and or the capabilities that they utilize to do those respective things to make the water drinkable and potable for humans and or the food necessary. And is that the long game? Maybe, right? If I'm already taking down things like, banking and the health industry, and like now I'm starting to push you back into the, the quote unquote dark ages, if you will, right? Now I'm taking away, I have to go back to the old school farming. As you said, maybe the equipment doesn't exist, or they have to try to find pieces and parts to get that back running, because any kind of book, fiction, nonfiction that you read, it's a time game, right? It's this whole length of time. So that's just a plan in it, right? There's the whole D-Day, then you go minus 1 week, 2 weeks, so on and so forth. So you put that strategically in there. So it's a concern that you look at all these advanced persistent threats that are in these devices that people are finding, and you go, okay, when are they going to push that button for a tractor or a food processing plant or you name it, right? Anything else. Yeah. I mean, if they take down the finance industry, how many people that work for respective farmers, the agricultural business, are going to go in on day-to-day work because now they don't have the money to supply back to pay for whatever, right? So it's a whole chain of events, and it's very interesting to think about that from an event phase perspective.
Especially since the critical infrastructure sectors are actually created based on the military, right? You need these things in order to move an army, if you will. And obviously the betterment of society as a whole, like a country. You can't function without these particular items. And the critical 16 were actually the critical 15 until 2020 when they added food and ag finally, which is like, what took so long for us to put that on the list? I don't know. And again, I really wish someone would tell me because I really want to know. I'm very curious about this. However, the interesting thing about the food and ag industry is it still lasts at the table for funding. It's very heavily privately owned. We know this. And it's because, again, it comes into a lot of different human factors. Shame, the admitting that something happened, customer perception, what's going to happen to the shareholders, if it causes a foodborne illness, if it kills anybody. Those kind of things are all these factors that are in it that aren't good feeling. So we're instead of actually dealing with it in a proactive manner, we're just going to kind of ignore that and tuck it aside. Right. And I think as cybersecurity professionals, OT, ICS, any of the people that are in these particular critical infrastructures, it is our obligation, if you see something, you to say something. I go back to Boar's Head, for example, because that's one of the latest and greatestly disastrous things ever. You can't tell me that we wouldn't have seen something, because we're in everything. We know what's going on. And again, I will say this, that IT sees everything. So does security. We see everything. We see cameras. We see who people are logging in and out. We see the firewalls. We see it all. We can probably tell you if there's a spill before you even announce to your supervisor there's been a spill or something else has happened. We have an obligation as a human to report when we see something that happens, especially when it comes to this data situation and learning how to tackle it and where is it and what's important and what's secret. We need to acknowledge that there's secret special data in the food industry. I was on a podcast a couple of years back, Brian. The conversation came up with the host literally said, there's nothing secret in the food industry. And instead of beating him up on air, which I did not do, I said, hey, what's your favorite snack? And he mentioned a very heavily processed snack. I was like, oh, hey, did you happen to notice that the flavors changed with the filling and the actual pastry a couple years back? He's like, yeah, I totally did it. I said, yeah, I want more banana forward than vanilla forward, right? And he goes, yeah, that's weird. How do you know that? I said, yeah, because my company had bought it that I was working for. And they used to make it, the filling specifically. Yeah. I said, you can't tell me that that's not. He goes, well, what do you mean? Doesn't everybody have access to that recipe? I said, no. Because like you said at the beginning here, things change. You add a little bit, you take a little bit, a little right. This, little that, Yep. And and all the quality work that goes into it, all the marketing that goes into that, all the things that's coveted, that's secret, that's safe. We need to know this. And this is why, and I know you heard me say this many times already, especially when we first met, you need to understand the industry that you are assigned to protect. Yep. If you do not understand that industry, you need to leave that industry and go to the industry that you know, or learn more. One or the other has to happen.
I like the second part.
Yeah,
I like the learning more.
Stay curious, right?
Yeah, and like the whole Dr. Carol Dweck wrote the book called Mindsets, and they talk about growth mindset and fixed mindset. And it's not only like what you would see at face value of just learning it. It's actually like taking the time and understanding the resources and putting those in place so you can learn. So there's a little bit more as far as the intrinsic motivation goes for that. But to be honest with you, I completely agree. And again, right, one of the reasons I'm pursuing this terminal degree is to continue learning. I think that's so important. Things evolve so quickly. And again, it's everyone has different mindsets. You stated this a little bit before, but I want a big picture so I can focus on a small piece of that picture. I think if you just do small picture or like a very niche area and not understand everything else, you're doing yourself a disservice. So while people like you were there, right? You're at the industrial control system, right? So there you got way more, right? There was a ton of people there from other areas in the industrial area. And so I think that's imperative, because if you just stovepipe yourself, you're missing out on the opportunity to have conversations. A great example, right? I was talking a little bit about this in my presentation, and we've had a follow-up meeting, but there's a group of 60 folks in wastewater down in Texas, and they do this free event, and they invite people to come over and just have conversations in these areas that they're struggling in, whether that could be risk assessment, risk management, penetration testing, you name it, right? And they have these subject matter experts come in and have that conversation. And then they're able to learn and say, just like you did, right? And this may be more internal, and that's okay. Hey, you're on the struggle bus with this. So are we. How do we solve that? Well, we have some experts come and chat with us, or we found someone that we can actually learn from, right? That we just do some training or something like that. And honestly, like you said, this is why insurance exists and other people make profit and don't care about reputation, is you have to have the buy-in of leadership, or you're not going to have the funding and resources. And if you don't have that, you're not going to have people that care, right? And so they're going to eat it, whether at the end of the day, if that's their job, right? I thought that was really important. You're talking about distribution of things like SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds was big. Everybody heard about it. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, we were aghast about that. The big thing was that I forgot if it was the CISO or somebody, CIO, knew about it, still did it, and then he lost his job. And I think he actually got sued, if I'm not mistaken, by the government or someone else. That's where the teeth comes in. You see that in the medical industry. In fact, it was just The FDA was like section 704B or whatever said medical devices have to have reasonable cybersecurity, which that's talk about policy. I think when you have that subject, we'll talk about what reasonable means. I throw up every time I hear that word, by the way. Sorry, food people. But anyways, so I was like, what does that mean? But now there's some more coming out. There's some more direction about medical devices and so on, which, like I said, it came out like a week ago. There's just more and more coming out that's pushing that. And you have to follow that documentation, and people need to realize that from the C-suite all the way down to the people that are implementing it. And because it gets lost in between. And again, that's the biggest thing about policy is that middle ground. People can write it, talk about it. People know how to implement it, but they're losing that middle ground because that has to do with resource allocation. And then like the true understanding of like, what do we implement, right? There's the how, I got that. What do we implement? Because reasonable doesn't mean anything. And that's the medical, right? I mean, name it. You could throw it out there. It's across the board.
I think a lot of the reason why I really enjoy working working in food and ag in general as a cybersecurity professional or OT, whatever you want to call me, is they go through the same things that we go through in terms of risk assessments, posture, evaluating, quantifying, all these things. They're going through the same thing. They're just doing it from the food side, right? I challenge anybody who's listening, and I definitely would suggest you look this up too, is the Peanut Corporation of America. If you want to talk about a really messed up situation with food and allergens and people being hurt just because there was a corrupt head of leadership, there's your one. I believe he's still in jail, actually.
Oh,
also,
yeah.
too, I've said this a couple times, and I need to find a better way to say it, Brian. So maybe with your systems thinking mindset, maybe you could help me come up with a better way to say it. I really, really wish that the C-suites would take food safety and cybersecurity seriously in the same breath, because the cyber physical systems that you mentioned at the beginning of when we started talking are connected to food safety systems and are part of the food safety process. And that goes from agriculture all the way into like production. And I don't think any leadership ever wants to get the call that a cybersecurity incident affected food safety, caused a foodborne illness, or any of that, right? There are recalls that have happened, obviously, and people catch that, which is great. But could you imagine having to be, whether you're a CISO, a CIO, a CTO, any of the type roles, and have to call your CEO or your shareholders or your board or anybody and say, hey, just let you know, this is what caused this issue.
Yeah.
Yikes. This is the disconnect between our industries. Everybody's really focused on data, and that's great. It has to be protected, and God knows we've got enough issues with it, right? And it's definitely the new warfare in a lot of ways, and will continue to be. But we are not just dealing with data. We are dealing with safeguarding lives. Like, we are legitimately dealing with things that could end lives, devastate communities, cause more issues environmentally beyond any of that stuff. We just want people to be able to go home at night from their job and also keep their family safe and anyone else in the community around it, right?
Yeah.
Every time there's a disaster, it's a community issue, right? So when like Boar's Head had to close that plant because they had this awful food safety situation happen and people got sick and a few people passed, that affected that community. That was 500 people that lost their jobs. Now, that's so messed up. That was so avoidable, right? In a lot of ways. Same with Peanut Corporation of America, same concept. I'm really worried about what it's going to take for people to start paying attention, because policy is not being written about cybersecurity in the agricultural space. Yeah, there's the farm cybersecurity bill that's out there, but it's not enough. They want you to do exercises and tabletop exercises every 3 years to test your resilience. Every 3 years? Are you joking? Like, that should be quarterly at minimum, in my opinion. Well, it's about priorities, right? Can you roll it into your food defense budget? Can you allocate it to production? Can you do other things, right? It's all about how you creatively think about the problem and how you're thinking about the solution. Because a lot of times we are focused on the problem, and it needs to be more about the solution. What is the solution here? Education, awareness, understanding, connecting dots, systems thinking, all these things. Because the food industry is so interconnected with all these other industries. I mean, how are we going to move away from oil and gas? We're going to use it. We're going to use food. We're going to do biofuels. We're going to create things with more organic substances, because we have to have a solution, because we're eventually going to run out of all that. You know what I mean? And we're going to come back to soy is going to be the big purveyor. It is today already. And I think that people need to start taking a look at that. It may not affect your generation and right now, but it's going to affect kids, grandkids, and future generations. And if you don't care about any of that, okay.
To my generation, are we in the same age?
I really think that people need to start realizing that it's the betterment of humanity and it's for the greater good. And that's something that is really hard for people to wrap their heads around, because that's a larger, outside of their scope, because we forget that we're world citizens too. We're not just American citizens or wherever you come from. We're world citizens.
Yeah.
And
you reminded me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, you reminded me of something. So I was talking to my wife last night, and it has to do with this, right? Because everywhere I've gone, in fact, Jacob, the guy I brought to the last conference, was super surprised. And I said, man, I've heard at the conference the last 3 years I've gone, the resource allocation, the C-suite, how do we get people to understand and buy this in? And I've studied, with my company, and somebody pushed it, but it's called STPASEC, System Theoretical Process Analysis. And there's one with cybersecurity, and it started off in safety with Nancy Levison and MIT. And then a gentleman, William Young, goes by Dollar, did it for the cybersecurity side of the house. Anyways, the point being is it's a different way to think about it. And it stemmed from safety. And he learned I can utilize a lot of the stuff that was used for safety into security. So I'm going to just talk about two quick things, if you don't mind. There's a great book called The Power of Habit by Charles Dunham. I always pronounce his last name incorrectly, so my apologies. But one of the chapters or two talk about an aluminum factory. I can't remember. It's all real stuff. They were having safety issues, like life loss issues, and they're trying to figure out how to fix it. And so one of the guys, they went to the stakeholder meeting. They're pretty excited about learning about, this new profitability. And the guy said, we're not talking about any kind of stakeholder information. We're not talking about price. We're going to talk about safety. We are going to prioritize safety. And everyone's like, oh, what? We want to know about our numbers and how much we're making and all this stuff. And he said, no, we're going to focus on it. And he started implementing things and putting stuff in place. Some of those were, hey, I'm going to put these suggestion boxes down on the floor, right? And have people start writing about how we can make things safer. Well, they started to do this, and I'll make this short. They started to do that, but it actually started to make things more efficient as well. So you're saving lives, you're making it more efficient, which, oh, by the way, gives you higher profitability because now you're sustaining something longer and it's more efficient. So you're doing more making whatever kind of aluminum widgets, if you will, in the same amount of time than you did. And there was a point where in there, he said that one of the gentlemen got word of a suggestion. And one of the things he said was, if any board member gets it, it must be presented. Like, you can't ignore it. And one of them did, and he fired him on the spot, which I thought was crazy. Wow. What it made me think about with all these things, as you said, the interweaving is, when did OSHA get stood up? When did safety start? And how did that start? Because we're at the point now where cybersecurity does create loss of life. I would say more indirectly with the food, right? But directly as in equipment, right? Whether that's a pressurization thing, something failing, creating a fire, direct loss of life. So
it's the cyber physical. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I mean by that is, I think we're at that time period now. I think, I was asking my wife, who was in medical, like, when did they start? Like, how many resources were allocated to you for safety, right, in the medical community? When you looked at your budget, did they say 10 or 12% or whatever is for PPE and other safety measures, right? Because that's literally what they do, right? The Checklist Manifesto is a great book talking about some small things that increase, saving lives. And it's like, but how much funding goes to that? Because now it's like, we're looking at that from a cybersecurity perspective. There's these separate organizations that are getting funded in communities because we have safety organizations and you name it, any industry. When are we going to have the funding and the resource allocation for separate cybersecurity organizations in all those industries? Because they're not doing it. They're picking somebody to save face. They're saying, hey, we're going to hire cybersecurity so we can, I hate to say this is pretty, whatever. Hey, they're the scapegoat, right? Stuff goes down. It's the cybersecurity guy or girl. They're gone. They're out. See ya. Thanks. Thanks for being there and filling that position, because they're asking for it, right? They're looking at stuff going around. And this is, by the way, cross industry. And you can go back and look at some history of some people that chose to leave their jobs because they kept asking for things and they weren't getting it. And it's like, hey, at the end of the day, it is just as important as safety. Security and safety are blended together. They make sense. You need to allocate those resources as necessary in both those fields. I mean, that's where we're at with that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, cyber PHAs, the focus on looking at safety of a facility as well as cybersecurity is super important. I mean, not shameless plug, but my product Anson OT does that. And we know a few other people that are focused on that. I do think that people need to start looking at things in parallel because they are similar. And this is what's important. We found our episode on agri-terrorism featuring the Animal Agricultural Alliance insightful. Here's another opportunity to explore more important conversations about our food system. And if you haven't already listened to that episode yet, I would highly recommend it. Speaking of important conversations, inspiration comes in countless forms. It's a thought, a conversation, a connection, a chain reaction. We never know exactly how inspiration will hit, but we do know this. When ideas and perspectives are shared across the table, they don't just add, they multiply. At the Animal Ag Alliance 2025 Stakeholder Summit, happening April 30th through May 2nd in Arlington, Virginia, hundreds of food chain partners will come together, tackle one of the biggest topics in the industry, sustainability. This year's theme, Food for Thought, Dishing on Sustainability. It's all about bringing together a diverse group of decision makers, from farms and ranches to restaurants and retailers, to discuss the future of how we raise and distribute animal protein. With a dash of innovation and a heaping serving of collaboration, the summit is where meaningful conversations happen, shaping the future of our food system for generations to come. Register by April 25th to reserve your seat at the table. For more details, visit animalagalliance.org or check out the link in the show notes. I think people need to take a step back and realize that, again, like food defense, food protection people in general are fighting the same fight as cybersecurity. They're just doing it on the food side. But the technology they use is the stuff that we're supposed to be protecting. Make that make sense. So business continuity, disaster recovery all have to be included in these conversations. And we're doing so many things in silos, Brian. I know you know this, that we're missing the ability to go across. And I've said it before, and I'll continue saying it, disruption. We need people to come across it and say, hey, just to let you know, these people over here in silo A are doing the same thing you're doing in silo D. Let's have you talk to each other. To me, finding that common ground where people can stand together as, individuals as well as a community is super important. And this is what I love about the OTICS environment. And I'm sure you can speak to this very clearly too, Brian. We really are a community in ourselves. As if you take it like the cybersecurity community as a large, I love our niche. I love being in the OTICS space because we really do get that we're doing more for humanity than just making sure you can send emails and they don't get attacked, and it really brings a sense of meaning and purpose to your job in a different way as well. Making sure that people understand that we are interconnected. We are constantly working. That's why I do the presentations I do about the soybean, how we're all interconnected and how this little plant brings us all into a full circle. And I think that if people started looking at it, not just in their own little environment and get stuck on it, it would probably alleviate some stress and would start to see that, hey, you got a whole support group behind you and you got all these people that are with you. So
I think cybersecurity professionals wear many hats, not only in their complete discipline in the cybersecurity arena, but they're also part-time PMs and part-time storytellers.
That's right.
So you have to go in with the mindset of being able to storytell and be able to present data appropriately at any given time according to your audience, right? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is then you get into the PM arena of looking at numbers, right? So I was fortunate, just through my path or whatever, I did some schoolwork in finances. Not the big finances, just, courses or whatever, but it was very eye-opening because that enables you from a project management perspective to go in and look at the resource allocation. So you can start going and looking at your company's resource allocation and start funding that out. Hey, 20% year over year or whatever to add to your cybersecurity needs, if you will. But the biggest thing is, like you said, having the buy-in from those other people and not being a stovepipe. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the things that we do, we do mission-based risk assessments, right? So it's a little bit more, I don't want to say stringent, but more focused. And I like it a little bit better than a typical cyber tabletop. So it was so important because we did have the right people in the room. We have the logisticians. We have the warfighter, the operator. We have the people that are responsible for the finances in the room, right? We have the decision makers. We have the cyber hacker, ethical professionals in the room. You're all sit around talking about that to that same goal. At the end of the day, it's the same goal, which is, again, the mission. That could be the mission of safe and secure food. It could be the mission of safe power grids, to supply safe water, wastewater, whatever occurring. That's the same goal. And you have to sit in there because then you can hear their perspective and you're able to get that and you go, okay, awesome. And at the end of the day, now when you're going up that next echelon or level or leadership and you're asking and you go, listen, this is like across the board. I'm not saying do it in a paper document where you go sign all the different organizations, their leads on it, but now they all understand. So if you're sitting in the boardroom or another room together with one of those leaders, you all start to get the head nods and you go, hey, remember Bob, when we were talking about that and, actually how we're getting that supply in and how that's such a big deal to you. Right. And then, oh yeah. Hey, Jake, remember when we talked about the need and hey, if it fails, then now we're going to be put back 2 weeks, which according to Jane means now we're losing, a revenue of $2 million. So you have all the people in the room, you're tying it all in. So, and you have the data and the data, it is so hard. Every leader I've ever gone to, doesn't matter what kind of personality, because some people like pictures, some people like words, some people like numbers. If you show them that data, you've done the research, it is very, very difficult for them to dismiss that. It is very difficult, and that's proven out. Go in with your idea, your emotion, because you're a cybersecurity person, but have the data to back what you're talking about. Have those use cases like you just mentioned and some other ones I found in that article I sent you that are out there, and show those people that. Because sometimes, like you said, they're either buried in trying to make profit for their stakeholders or doing something else, and they don't see all those things occurring because, as you know, they're not necessarily always publicized in mainstream media. So very good stuff there. So anyways, I just want to prove a point hey, while it's filling your need and sense of purpose and satisfaction, we're doing it globally for all the people around the world.
Yeah. And I think you're right. You got to quantify it and you have to get people to build community together, common ground. That's what those exercises are for. I call them extended security assessments, extended risk assessments rather. So ERAs, as I call them. And I think it's super important to get everybody from different functions in the room together to be able to figure out the common goal of, hey, let's keep the company running, keep it working, keep them safe. And then obviously make a product that's not going to hurt people kind of thing. I think those are super important. I think moving forward, though, we need to find a way to do that on a grander scale. I do think that there needs to be better regulations that serve better purpose. I do think that we need to have policies that make sense for all these stakeholders in these facilities. There isn't a cybersecurity, food and agricultural framework yet, but I think we need to have a little bit more industry specific frameworks to help people, because ultimately what happens is people just need to know, how do I not have this happen? What do I do when this happens? And how do I prevent this from happening? It's the building of resilience.
It's so funny, right? Kristen, that you said that. So this is something I've been thinking about, especially in my new position. So I do security control assessing, right? Which is think of any kind of NIST. You have a security control or some instance, the framework is more overarching, but they point to controls, right? Security controls. And then, okay, now you go into the narrative, you're like, how do I answer these controls? Something I see missing. And I had a young lady, Glenda Snodgrass. So she did a presentation the same place I did. And the new CMMC directive coming out, I don't know if you've seen or heard about it. It's not in your space necessarily, but it has to deal with NIST 171, which are a bunch of controls. They're all very similar, by the way, across the board, you name it. But she had some examples in her presentation. She had examples of some good examples and bad examples of how to actually answer these security controls. And I thought, how important and how imperative that is, because this goes back, right? This is that education piece, and it's sort of a swinging pendulum, if you will, is if I have a good example, I understand that I can't just rely on a Windows or Linux operating system or something along those lines, or, VxWorks or something to protect my system. I can't just say the operating system is protecting it. I need to understand that those respective FPGAs or other things in a PLC or SCADA system have more configurations, hopefully, and things I can do to protect my system and holistically the system of systems, right? And also, goodness gracious, I've written some papers, IoT. Holy cow. Talk about you do all this protecting and the weakest link is, one of your third party vendors just coming in like straight access and then it just defeats everything. But like you really have to look at that and have a good understanding. And I think using examples is a great idea. You can write a ton of policies and people are going to interpret it and then they're still going to fail at the end of the day. They need to have some good examples and use cases specific. Now, it doesn't mean like, hey, I write this really, big thing about, VxWorks and this is how this works here. And I'm using something else, but it's like, it gives you a really good idea, right? And the people that can read between the lines, if you will, have a better understanding, right? Separation of roles, whatever it may be in these respective instances, they get an understanding like, oh, okay, that's what I need to do. That answers that. And that should get the wheels spinning. And you don't see that often because I do agree, but there's such a gap between these large policies and then the procedures and then the implementation.
Well, the problem is that the policies need to be written at a baseline. Like this is the bare minimum you need to do, the bare minimum to be secure. I'll just say that in air quotes.
But that's very subjective.
And then from there, the industry can add whatever they want on top of that, right? And I'm saying this because I wrote global policy for a large company. I had to write over multiple languages, multiple cultures, multiple restrictions, multiple laws, all these other things. So we just came up with the absolute minimum. And then the operating companies could write whatever they wanted on top of it and make it special. It's kind of like the United States has to do the minimum on the federal level, and then the states can do whatever they want at that point. I think that that's how we have to kind of approach it, where here is your minimum cybersecurity policy. And then the industries can add onto it safety, different other regulations that need to go in, blah, whatever. I think that that's how we have to start approaching it more so than we already are. But again, that gets convoluted because then you're going to have like 15,000 policies and all these regulations and it's going to kind of be ridiculous. I don't think there's one ring to rule them all, Brian. There's no way, right? There's no way.
But have you ever noticed, like when you talk to people, right, Kristen, it's like what I have seen sit and resonate for long periods of time is a story that uses a real example, right? So I think having policies is absolutely necessary and needed, 100%. So please don't take that the wrong way, 100%. But I also like an example, right? And I don't know if this is necessary or not, and who would take this on, but it's like, hey, when I'm writing these policies and procedures and implementation, like I'm following an example system. I mean, you name it. It could be a tractor. It could be whatever fits into that space. It could be a manufacturing plant, something along those lines. But I get to follow what that means through those respective steps and levels of documentation. And I mean, it's out there, right? You really have to hunt it down. But it would be nice if I got to follow that along. And I don't know if people just choose not to do that on purpose or if it's too much work or they haven't thought about that. But it's nice, right? Use an example.
I'm following you.
What's that?
I'm following you. I think really what you need is a scenario.
That's exactly
along
right.
with whatever it is. Yes. So that's what the cyber PHA assessments do. They actually write in scenarios. So I think, again, I completely understand this and not shameless plug again that ANSI uses scenarios as well. But
you're welcome, by the way.
Yeah, I know. You actually just lined me up. You're so funny.
Yeah,
but it's you're right. And I think that is why you and I resonate as people together, because we both speak in analogies. We need to have context with our terminologies. We need to have an understanding of how things work, and that I find that I learned that back in the day, because I've had a very long career, that when I was helping people troubleshoot issues, end users, and they'd be hopping mad or just generally like, why is this woman talking to me? I don't understand her technical terminology. I had to find a way to communicate to people where they were. So analogies work really great. I still find myself doing that, and it works really well in C-suite levels and boards. You have to be able to speak in a way that resonates. And you're right, we're missing that piece, the resonation piece. I think it was a couple months back. Do you remember when Krispy Kreme's got hacked? It was a third party pop. And when you were talking about third parties, it made me laugh because for the first time in a while, I saw the cyber community actually talking about food and agriculture on that level, because the food industry was in the news. And it made me kind of go, you need to have donuts that have a problem in order to get you to pay attention. Like it was sort of, I was sort of irritated, actually. It was really irritating. And then actually a few people, when McDonald's went through their issue with the onions, the people were sending me all these articles, and I'm like, I know, I'm talking to the experts that are on the news that are informing these articles. Like, I know what's happening. And they're like, well, why does this keep happening? And I said, because you don't know what it is and what it isn't. Like, so let's go through this exercise again. And at the beginning of our conversation, correlation, Brian. You were talking about when you lived in Europe and you were talking about eggs. Part of the reason why the United States is so different when it comes to a lot of food things is we live in a very big country. We have a lot of space and we have a lot of people. So they don't necessarily have to refrigerate their eggs because they're not moving them across vast miles. We refrigerate and wash our eggs because they're in transport. The eggs that get to your shelf are probably several months old. I know people are like, ew. No, don't forget, it's fine. It's a food safety way, it's fine. But in Europe, they don't necessarily have to do that because you could just go maybe a mile to the grocery store and that egg house was next door, if you will. We have to be careful with apples and oranges here, and that, to use another food analogy, that we have different things going on here. We have different miles that things travel. And because our food system is so complex, we can get avocado shipped in from XYZ place, or we can get tuna shipped from Japan, and it will arrive and you will have it on your plate by your lunch.
Yeah, Kristen, which is so funny you bring that up because I wrote a paper on another course. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but it was with port security and how like they're starting to sneak illegal stuff in, but how, they're going in databases and changing numbers so that they're not tracked or accounted for, but they're putting these big x-rays in so that the trucks that take off the big sea containers, the cargo containers off ships will go through this x-ray to find whatever is going in it. But when there was the big thing in the book, my brain just sandworms, and they talked about the Petnia, non-Petnia, and they brought down the port in Holland. And you think about that and you're like, okay, now my food is sitting somewhere for how long, right? Potentially, like if there's something going down at a port. So it's like you just said, there's all these things in the supply chain and all these things that interweave that have such an effect, right? And now those respective farmers or whomever else are starting to lose they're kind of, the money, or at least some point in that supply chain, they're losing money. So there's that cybersecurity that ties all the way back, just like you said. I'm really looking forward to my tuna from Japan and it's stuck in a port for however long. So by the time I get it, it's not so great.
Yeah. And that's why people don't realize the implications of supply chain in general, because the ports are going to strike again. It's probably going to happen to this recording. They have not, but people don't realize what comes off very quickly in these ports that has to get to the grocery store and hit our supply chain first. Berries, bananas. I'm allergic to bananas, so I'm all for bananas not making it.
I remember you saying that before. How dare you?
But it's really interesting because people don't realize we don't have any seasons in grocery stores anymore, Brian. We can get pretty much what we want when we want it, right? But this is a global thing. This is why we've encouraged people to eat on more seasonal base because it helps with sustainability. But what people don't realize is how interconnected we are to the supply chain. If we have another issue like JBS, or interrupting supply chain, we're not going to have beef moving, or we're going to have problems with our beef and things like that. There's so much interdependency all over the place. To start unraveling it, like I said at the beginning, is like a ball of string that is just really large and it's really ridiculous. And the cat is still knocking it around. Well,
I think like you said, so I was reading up, like, just to be fair, I was reading up, and while you would think like, hey, I can knock down a power grid or something, as like you said, the agriculture is a little bit behind that. So they're going to look at, the lowest hanging fruit. And if agriculture hasn't put the resource, time and money into the cybersecurity, that's a lot easier to put a ransomware attack or something along those lines that ends up affecting, the cyber physical system down the chain than it is trying to strike at more maybe a larger company that is supplying power to that respective manufacturing plant or supply chain, because they have the funding and they've had, a stronger protection and higher levels of protection. So again, low hanging fruit and
all the puns. We're here for all the puns. I was actually just thinking, thinking low hanging fruit. And I was about to say the meat and the potatoes of it is.
Here we go. This is what we're doing.
Let's really get into it. What really struck me years back was when I went to a food safety conference for the first time. And I really had that conversation with the people that were going through the same things we were going through, but just on the food side. But also working in within the food industry years back, or even being in the food industry as a server or serving coffee or serving meals. You really start to look at how things are so interdependent and interconnected. And then we had Russia invading Ukraine, and they took out power and ag first. And this is the way warfare will be. I mean, we're watching our first cyber warfare really in real time. I mean, they're laying fiber optic cables so they can just send out drones. It's a lot of things. We don't need to get into all the details. However, it crushed the market for wheat because they couldn't sell it. And then they were a high producer. But I think what's interesting is that people need to start making those connections that it's not just about the hackers with the financial, and you've already alluded to this while we're talking. It's also nation state threat actors. If you were going to take down another country, just like Risk or Civilization or any of those games that we played when we were younger, or still play to this day for that matter, what are you going to go after first? You're going to go after electricity, and you're going to go after food. And then water is in there as well, of course. You could take the water out, that would affect the food as well. I think people need to not panic and not think it's a disaster, catastrophe movie. Truthfully, it's going to come down to water and food. You got to secure those two things. People in theory can be okay with electricity for an extent, depending on what's going on in their lives and situations, but we can't function without food and water. We'll have total anarchy, chaos. We will displace and break down governments very quickly as well, because they can't take care of their people. So this is where I struggle with, is we've just added IoT. We've added cyber physical systems into these places, right? They're not even made securely. So that's problem number one. Again, product security people, you have my heart. I feel for you. But we haven't created a way for people to take their daily lives, like a farmer, just a random farmer, to be able to work with those products, to feel secure about it, and not worry about where their data is going, because the cloud is the cloud, right? But how is that data not intercepted? How do we deal with that? We're already watching some of this happening with a lot of other things that are going on that are in the auxiliary, forest fires, things like that, people using drones, getting it caught in planes and other things. We need to start thinking a little bit more broader, I think, in terms of, hey, if I do something like this, here's the ramifications. And that's where those scenario drills, that's where those tabletop exercises, that's where those tabletop conversations happen. When we meet each other, Brian, at conferences and stuff, and we have these like deep dive conversations of coulda, shoulda, woulda, or how do we move past the problem and get to that solution? We need to do that more, I think. And you're right. Those analogies, those conversations, the storytelling needs to come forward. But a lot of it is embarrassing, or we don't want to talk about the shame of something happening. And this is why I say that cybersecurity is a lot about shame mitigation as well as risk, because we need to get people to move past their feelings. We need you to get past the feelings part and start to get to the sense part. Like, let's get to the sense conversation. These are the things that matter, and this is what happened. And I don't care. Like, I don't care exactly what happened. I just want to get to the part where we make it okay again. Yep. And that's the really important part of what it means to work in these critical infrastructures and sectors. Brian, thanks for being here. I really enjoyed it. You made me question some things and made me rethink some things. And I appreciate that. I love it when guests do that. They challenge me when I'm talking to them in a way. You're right. We need better storytelling. We need more analogies. We need to start thinking about things differently, but also not make a big fuss about it. Like, we don't need to make it a big deal. We just need to start, and do things that are going to be more proactive. So as we're leaving, I want to make sure that you give a plug out to your podcast and anything else you want to say before we close the show. Yeah.
First off, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure, honor. I 100% guarantee I'll see you in person again at some point at another conference. When that is, I don't know just yet. But I really appreciate you having me on. I am glad that this is getting out and being shared amongst multiple communities and industries. And I think that's very important. Again, just researching and seeing it across the board, and it's striking. And I'm so happy that you have a voice out in that community, and you're the right person to have that voice. Ironically and funny enough, I do have a YouTube channel podcast that is also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's called People Add Value Experience. And the funny part, I said ironically, is I don't really talk about cybersecurity. I talk about interesting people and small business and entrepreneurship. So while the focus is not cybersecurity, it does come up as far as protection of people and data and so on. But a lot of it is, how people are standing up and protecting their people just in general, and how they're surviving as a community. And, I do have some restaurant people on, and people from the entertainment industry and other places, because again, it's really that tie-in across the board. So whatever that may be. So again, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I'm really excited for this episode to come out. I'm looking forward to feedback, because I like to learn and grow, as you stated earlier on. And I hope this community continues to learn. And again, appreciate you taking the time and effort to do this.
on today's episode of the Bites and Bites podcast. I want to say a big thank you to Brian for joining me and sharing his thoughtful insights on cybersecurity, leadership, and how we think about risk in our global food supply. Also, we discussed a lot on this episode. I did my best to put all the links to those topics in the show notes. And of course, thank you for listening, supporting, and being part of the community. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with friends and colleagues who might find it valuable. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.